All right, so today we're diving into something super important for any nonprofit, really, to be successful. Figuring out how to really engage, your donors.
Mm. Mm.
And this is something that whether you've been doing this for years or you're just starting to kind of explore it, getting this right, it can really, it can make or break you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've shared some really fascinating material with us for this deep dive, an article all about creating those personalized donor journeys, and then some info on this platform I'd never even heard of before called Help You Sponsor.
Yeah.
So we're going to unpack all of that and see what actionable insights can we pull out for our listeners today.
Yeah, I think that's key, and you hit it right on the head that the donor life cycle.
Okay.
Understanding that entire life cycle is so key because it's not just about getting that first dollar, right?
Right.
It's about cultivating those relationships so they last.
Okay, so let's unpack this whole donor life cycle idea a little bit more.
Yeah.
What makes it so powerful?
Well, I think one of the most powerful things is, and they've done studies on this, if you can increase your donor retention now, that's keeping people giving. If you can just increase it by 5%,
Wow.
it can increase your revenue over 3 years by 25%.
25%.
25%. So that's the power of really looking at it as a long game.
Wow. That's huge. And it really highlights, I think, why focusing on that long game, building those relationships. It is so essential for nonprofits because you're not just chasing the next dollar, you're building a sustainable base of support.
Exactly.
And this article we have, it really dives into how different the strategies can be depending on, what type of donor you're trying to engage. For
Yeah.
instance, they talked about the difference between a micro donor
Right.
versus a major donor, which I thought was super interesting.
Yeah, and that's where you really see a difference too. Because, I mean, you think about a micro donor, maybe somebody giving under $100. They might be very moved by a welcome package.
Hmm.
Something that maybe even includes a handwritten note from somebody who's been impacted by their donation.
Yeah, that's nice.
Whereas, your major donor is probably thinking a little bit bigger picture, and they may be looking for an invitation to an event where they can kind of meet the team, be more hands-on. So it's a totally different way to approach it.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about tailoring your approach to where they're at and what they're going to find meaningful.
Exactly.
And speaking of first impressions, this article really emphasized how important that very first interaction, someone has with your organization, how important that is.
Oh, it's true. I mean, just like meeting someone new, you want to put your best foot forward, right?
Right, exactly.
And so in this digital world, a lot of times that starts with your website.
Totally.
So many people.
Your website is your digital front door, basically, at this point.
It is. It is.
So what are some of the things that, what are some of the key things that nonprofits should really be focusing on to make sure that first impression, when someone lands on that website is a good one?
Well, I mean, it should go without saying, but sometimes we need to hear it, right? It needs to be easy to navigate. It needs to be visually appealing. So that means clean design. It means clear calls to action. Make sure it's mobile friendly because so many people are browsing on their phones. And actually, that article pointed out that a well-designed website was actually found to be more effective than even social media or direct mail when it comes to making that first impression.
Wow, that's really interesting. I actually hadn't thought about it like that before, but it makes sense though, because your website is the one place you have complete control over the messaging and the experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, let's say someone lands on your website, they're intrigued by your mission, but how do you kind of keep them engaged without overwhelming them with donation requests right off the bat?
Yeah, I think that's where understanding the psychology of giving comes in, right?
Yeah.
Because people don't generally give just to give. They're driven to donate because they want to make a difference.
Of course. Yeah.
So instead of hitting them with give, give, give right away, think about how can you nurture that initial spark of generosity they felt when they landed on your page.
So what are some practical ways to do that? Because I think that's something a lot of nonprofits, maybe struggle with a little bit.
Yeah. And this article had some really good, clever tactics in it. One was a welcome kit. And I love this idea because it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's more about just a gesture of appreciation that reinforces your mission.
Right.
And they gave an example of the Great Rivers Environmental Law Center, and they send new donors a handwritten note, a copy of their latest newsletter, a personal contact card. It's not a huge thing, but it's something. right?
I love that example. I mean, especially because in today's world, everyone's so used to just getting everything digitally. So to get something in the mail, that's like a little gift in itself. Like, oh wow, they care enough to send this.
Right. It shows effort.
Yeah.
And I think people really, you know, they recognize that.
Yeah, definitely. And it goes a long way. The article also mentioned something called like a 30-day welcome email series.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I love that because you can really use that to nurture new donors.
Hmm.
And again, the key here is storytelling
Okay.
and impact. Share stories from the people that you serve,
Mhm.
highlight the outcomes of your programs, really showcase how those donor contributions are making a real difference. And the key is you don't have to ask for money in every email.
Right. You don't want to bombard them. You don't want to scare them off before they've even had a chance to like really get to know you.
Right, exactly.
So speaking of getting to know you, how do we kind of transition from these like initial interactions to, cultivating those really valuable recurring donors?
Yeah,
The ones who are giving monthly, annually, and become like your organization's biggest cheerleaders?
right. Oh, you're talking about the holy grail of fundraising.
Right,
Right.
right.
Tuning those one-time givers into people who are, consistently supporting your work.
Yes.
And it's not just about the bigger impact it makes today, it's building that sustainability for your organization
Right.
so you can plan for the future.
Yeah, it's like the subscription model we see everywhere now.
Right.
Like from streaming services to coffee deliveries.
Exactly.
People are just they like that consistency of it. And it makes sense, I mean, for nonprofits too, right?
Perks.
Because if you have that regular support coming in,
Yeah.
then it allows you to really focus on the mission
Makes
and
sense,
not be like scrambling like, "Oh, where's the next dollar going to come
You're
from?"
not always in that reactive mode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting. The article actually drew a parallel here to help a sponsor's pricing structure
Right.
because they've embraced this model too.
Oh.
So instead of like just those one-off transactions, it's about commitments.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because it does speak to that whole shift
Yeah.
from transactional giving to really feeling like you're invested
Yeah.
in the organization for the long term.
Exactly.
And they see that.
It's like a partnership almost.
Exactly. But of course, we do, as much as recurring donations are fantastic, there is a time and a place to encourage larger gifts,
Right.
especially as people become more and more engaged with your organization.
Right, right. And it's about, I think, being mindful of the donor's capacity to give.
Of course, yeah.
But there are definitely ways to encourage those larger gifts without coming across as, pushy or like,
Right, right.
like just like money hungry, basically.
Exactly. And a lot of times that comes down to being really specific with your ask.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so instead of just saying like donate now,
Mm-hmm.
really paint that picture of what that gift is going to do.
Yeah.
So for instance, instead of saying, help us provide meals to families, you might say a gift of $500 will provide a week's worth of nutritious meals to 10 families struggling with food insecurity.
Right, right. You get really specific.
Yeah, so the more concrete and impactful you can make it,
Yeah.
the better.
Oh, I can see how that would be so much more compelling because people want to know, like, okay, my money's gonna,
Yeah, exactly.
it's gonna make a tangible difference.
Exactly.
Yeah. And speaking of making people feel valued, the article also touched on a group that I thought was interesting because they said it often gets overlooked,
Yes.
and that's those mid-level donors.
A mid-level donor, yeah.
So who are they?
So these are your consistent supporters.
Okay.
They might not be writing you the big checks, but they're giving consistently.
Right.
And they're so essential to your financial health.
Got it. Got it.
And they're often overlooked because they're not at the very top, right?
Right.
They're not, the major donors, but they are so important. And this article actually called them your secret weapon.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Why secret weapon?
Well, it's like that Pareto principle,
Okay.
the 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
It often shakes out where a small percentage of your donors end up accounting for a big percentage of your revenue.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So those mid-level donors,
Right, yeah.
they're often a big part of that.
So you're saying they're a secret weapon because we don't maybe give them the same kind of love that
Oh,
we give to those major donors sometimes.
Exactly. They don't often get the same level of personalized attention.
Which is a shame because at the end of the day, everyone likes to
Everyone wants to feel appreciated.
feel appreciated. A little recognition goes a long way.
Oh, it goes so far, yeah. And so that tailored recognition is really important for this group. And the article gave an example from the Sarasota Orchestra. They do this tiered benefit system
Yeah.
where, at different giving levels, you get different perks, and it might be program recognition or, being able to exchange tickets easily,
Yeah.
invitations to special events.
Oh, I love that.
Right. So it's those little
Yeah,
things.
it's like a customer loyalty program,
Yes.
but for nonprofits.
Exactly.
And it creates that sense of belonging that makes
Yeah.
people feel valued.
It doesn't have to be anything extravagant or expensive, even just, again, a handwritten thank you note
Right.
or, a personal impact report. That goes a long way.
It really does. It's
Uh,
about that personal touch. Okay, so we can't wrap up this deep dive without talking about the elephants in the room, which
Right.
is those major donors and legacy giving. I mean, these are, the folks that have the potential to make a truly transformative impact.
Absolutely.
But I imagine building those relationships, that's a whole
It's a whole other level.
it's a whole other ball game,
Yeah.
right?
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about cultivating trust over time.
Right.
Being really transparent about your operations, about your finances, and then really understanding, what is that donor's philanthropic vision? What are their values?
Right.
Because it's not just about getting the biggest check. It's about making sure your missions are aligned.
Right. Yeah, because otherwise it's not going to be a sustainable relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, the article did mention this thing about special experiences and that can be a good tactic
Yes.
for engaging those major donors. And I've definitely seen this where organizations will do those behind the scenes tours or even just intimate dinners with program beneficiaries.
Yes.
But it made me think what about those smaller nonprofits who don't have these big budgets to work with? How can they create those meaningful experiences
Yeah.
without breaking the bank?
That's such a good question. And it really challenges us to think outside the box.
Right, exactly.
Because it doesn't have to be about lavish, expensive things, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about, what can you offer that's more personal? Maybe it's something like inviting a major donor to meet with your program beneficiaries directly,
Oh, wow.
right? Let them see firsthand the impact.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's, offering them a platform to share their expertise with your team,
Oh,
right? Maybe they have incredible business acumen or they have connections,
that's a great idea.
right, that could benefit the organization.
Mm.
It's finding those ways to make them feel like an integral part of the mission,
I love that.
not just a source of funding.
Yeah. It's recognizing that that major donors, like all donors,
Right.
are driven by this desire to make a difference.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the human side of donor engagement, which I think is so key. But I'm also curious, to get your take on how technology kind of fits into all of this. We've mentioned Help You Sponsor a couple of times now. How does a platform like that kind of factor into, creating these impactful donor journeys?
Well, technology, it can be a game changer for nonprofits
Right.
when it's used strategically.
Yeah.
So a platform like Help You Sponsor, it can help automate a lot of those administrative tasks
Okay.
that bog nonprofits down.
Hmm.
Things like sending out acknowledgments, processing donations, managing donor data.
Right. All of that stuff takes time.
It does. And if you can free up your time
Right.
to focus on building those relationships, then that's where technology can be so powerful.
It's like having an extra set of hands.
Exactly.
Or maybe even a whole team
Yes.
dedicated to streamlining all those operations.
Exactly.
So instead of you being bogged down by spreadsheets and email blasts, you can really focus on that human connection.
Exactly. And I think Help You Sponsor understands that.
Okay.
Because they really emphasize what they call seamless operational excellence.
Okay.
So they handle that back end stuff
Got it.
so that you can focus on what matters.
I love that. Yeah, that's what it's all about. But it makes me think, with all this talk about data and automation and things, we can't forget about, the ethical side of
Oh,
things.
absolutely. That's huge.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought that up because transparency and communication around donor data, it's paramount.
Right.
It's one of the most important things you can do because donors need to understand how their information is being used.
Right. They need to trust you.
They have to. They have to be able to trust you. And it's not just about checking the box. It's about, did you only collect the data you really need? Do they know exactly how it's being used? Is it easy for them to opt out if they want to?
Right. Right.
So it's those little things that build the trust.
They really do, because it shows that you respect them.
Yes.
And you value their support beyond just
Exactly.
dollar amount.
It's more than a transaction, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, like from understanding that whole donor life cycle to leveraging technology, but all while, keeping those ethical considerations like front and center.
Right.
If you had to distill it all down to like one key takeaway
Yeah.
for our listeners, what would it be?
It's simple. The future of fundraising, it's about deep understanding. Technology, it's a tool. But at its heart, this work, it's still about human connection. It's about understanding what motivates people to give, building those relationships, making them strong, and making those donors feel like they're a part of something that's bigger than themselves.
Beautifully said. As we kind of wrap up here, I want to leave you with this. We've explored a lot of different strategies, a lot of different tactics, but the most powerful tool that you have is your own willingness to connect, your willingness to listen and
Yeah.
to learn. So as you navigate this world of nonprofit fundraising, I want you to ask yourself, what is one small change that you can make today based on what we've talked about to kind of deepen that impact?
I love it.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Until next time, keep those connections strong